Good morning to the brave group of people who get up this on a Sunday and to attend. I think that's wonderful. Two interesting things happened during the night since we last met. Donald Trump is insisting he's not quitting the race, which is interesting, I think, because if you have to start saying that you're not quitting, you're under pressure. So that might be a turning point. And the Dream Party won the elections in Georgia, so which I think is interesting. Well, we had a question.
But yes, does that mean Trump quits if he starts? He's not quitting.
No, the present Prime Minister stays on. Yeah.
No. I mean.
Trump. I think the fact that so early, so late in the game before the election, where it's virtually impossible to turn things around and get it on the candidate, he has to start saying that is not quitting. That just the fact that you have to say that instead of just ignore it.
That means he loses. Yeah.
It seems to me that that's a kind of a turning point.
All right.
I think it is. And it was these scandals with the way he treats women, etc. But then some people are saying, maybe some people, as my wife said, maybe some people even admire him for those things, right? So you never know. You never know. And this is but in the Wild West where men are men and women like them to be that. This may be part of the explanation. Yesterday there was a question regarding the importance of culture, and I think that is indeed very important. I hadn't thought of thinking about or talking about that, but I think we should, because when the question comes up, because clearly there are increasing returns and diminishing returns, and the apple falls from the tree today just like it did in the times of Newton, right? So there are things that are given, increasing and diminishing returns and technical change and how it spreads and these things, which we talked about. But then it is also the issue of culture. And Werner Sombart was mentioned yesterday, and Werner Sombart wrote a book, Why Is There No Socialism in the United States? He wrote this around 1907, something like that, 10 years ago. And it's a good question, right? And he built some other research, but he has some contributing factors. And I think if we briefly look at this, which is kind of an exaggeration, but it's still true, and then perhaps we could look at what would we say about the Ukraine in this context. What's positive and what's negative regarding culture and development. Because there was something in the American culture which made it very suitable for the market economy. And a couple of contributing factors. The frontier thesis. I think this is very important. This is an American historian in University of Wisconsin, Turner, in 1870s, 80s. And he wrote this thesis, this article on the importance of the frontier. And the frontier is the limit between Western civilization and Indian nations. So when the Europeans came to Boston around 1600 at Plymouth Rocks, the frontier was all the way to California. And then slowly, over a period of 300 years, that frontier moved from east to west until it hit the Pacific Ocean, right? And this historian said, well, this is so crucial for American character, because when you came off the boat, you know, all the Europeans came off a boat, and they were all more or less penniless. Most of them didn't have a penny. Right? So the alternative to staying in Boston and, let's say, working in a factory was to get free land further west. Right? And what they got, was it 400 acres, something like 1,600, 400 acres. It's a lot of, you know, a really huge plot of land that nobody could dream about in Europe. So the thing was that as long as an alternative to staying and working in the East Coast was moving west, wages would never be very low. Because either if the alternative to working where you were was to get free land for the West, right? So this formed the American mind, and it meant that, you know, you didn't need communism or social legislation, because everyone was rich until the frontier hit the Pacific Ocean, which was around 1900. You know, then they had all the land had been settled, but it took 300 years, and that's a long time in a young nation like the United States. So, what happened when they reached the frontier around 1900? What did the Americans do? Well, they went to war with Spain, right? And they took Cuba, and they took Puerto Rico, and they skipped to the other side of the Pacific Ocean and took the Philippines. So when the frontier came to an end, the Americans got imperialistic, or what they want to know. They needed more land. They had already taken Hawaii, and they'd already taken, you know, a good chunk of Mexico, which is now Texas and New Mexico. You know, they'd already taken that. They purchased land from the French. They took a big piece of Mexico, and they started buying up the islands. You know, they bought the island where Alexander Hamilton was born, in the Danish West Indies, from Denmark for $25 million, and that is exactly 99 years ago. So this expansion was important, right? And therefore, I think they got used to this idea about the frontier. And a very important policy document after World War II was the scientific advisor of Mr. Eisenhower. His name was Vannevar Bush. And Vannevar Bush wrote a pamphlet on the never-ending frontier of knowledge. Right? There may be a geographical frontier which comes to an end, but we can always pursue new knowledge, and that new knowledge is never ending, right? And I kind of like that idea. You know, it goes back to the Renaissance idea of that is our duty to create because we create in the image of God, etc. So we have to imitate God, and so it's a very, in that sense, very positive.
But does it work the same way as the physical expansion?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't, because the physical expansion, and that's, I think, what we're seeing now, that the physical expansion made it, the option of having free land meant that you didn't need socialism, because you had an automatic system of keeping wages high, right? And then the second argument, from some, which is more somber.
Excuse me, may I question?
Sure.
For example, Russia, the same frontier but in the other direction, in the east. Why this country use some socialistic idea in opposite to America? And maybe the same frontier but without the main key point, frontier for knowledge.
Yes.
But why Russia can't generate the same idea and the same ideology?
Well, if you look at, well, yes, very good question. You know, the one answer is climate. Siberia is not California, you know. But you had I think under Catherine the Great, they had this idea of global territory. Territory was an important part of Russian strategy as well. But I think the main reason is probably feudalism. That the people, there were no free people who could take up land, right? And I think feudalism is a really big sin in a way, because it's very ruining, because it removes people's incentives, right? It removes it makes it, if you have ambitions, you become an enemy of the state, But you see that there were settlers, and there were German settlers, and there was a pattern of, also in Russia, of creating new settlements, right? And they attracted foreigners to do that also. So there was an element of it, but I think coming out of a feudal past made it very difficult. And around the year 1770, the Academy of Science in St. Petersburg had a competition, a prize essay competition. And they asked, would it be better for Russia to abolish feudalism and to have self-owning peasants, which was an incredibly radical idea. Right? And this was the time of revolutionary France, and you had important French philosophers, Languet and other people, Galin, and people who were really radical, fighting feudalism in France. They contributed to this volume in St. Petersburg. And I collect books, and and it was bilingual in French and Russian, and the layout was just like the German university prize essays at the time. So these were enlightened people in the Academy of Sciences in St. Petersburg, and there were some very good arguments for getting rid of feudalism, but that never happened. And that book is extremely rare. There is one copy in St. Petersburg. I found two other copies, and they are both in public libraries in Switzerland, where there was no feudalism. And then I have a book. So you can have some kind of counterfactual history, the things that never happened. Maybe if those ideas of freeing the peasants had worked in Russia in 1770, it would have been a completely different country. Yes?
It's because Russians lived in communes all their history, and they didn't have Renaissance that bore the individualism in Europe, and then this individualism.
Yeah. Well, but there was a bit of it. When I go, I haven't studied, because I don't speak the language, I haven't studied very much, but when I look at what Catherine the Great tried to do, I see some points of Seda there. But the problem is that the Russians hate Catherine so much that they don't, this is my little theory, that because she was a foreigner and because, they don't like her very much. But I think she may have been better than her reputation. But that's speculations on my part, because when I read some of the things that she was doing, it looks pretty good. But it didn't work. But you're right, the communes, and here is an important thing. When you move people out of their usual environment, they kind of lose all their inhibitions, in a positive sense. So entrepreneurs, taking people out of where they were born and see, well, here there are different rules, that creates a lot of entrepreneurship. So the fact that these people coming to the United States were the most, they were the people with the most initiative, and very often they were the marginal peasants, the ones who from Norway. They were the ones who were growing agriculture in the hillsides, very steep hillsides. And there is a Norwegian author who writes about this, and he says that the whole village moves from Norway to the United States, and the guy who had the poorest land in Norway is the one who gets the best farm, because then everyone had the same plot of land, the same quality of land, the same amount of land, right? So the people who had to work very hard to make a living back in Europe, they could work much less hard in the United States, right? So it was the fact that everyone started from square one, everyone got off the boat with virtually nothing, right? I think that was important. So they didn't have any historical weight, right? They were escaping feudalism, right? So no, it's a very interesting question. Why didn't it happen in Russia? But I think it definitely has to do with that the land was empty. Well, there were 2 million Indians there, at least who they marginalized, right? So
the best example of being a capitalist idea is sell in Alaska.
what?
Sell in Alaska from Russia.
Yeah. Yes.
Finance problems. That these days capitalism is more productive and more interesting and more power, sound than feudalistic Russia.
Yeah.
So Americans, United States realize their imperialistic ambitions by capitalistic instruments, by money, by selling and buying some sector to finance unsound capitalistic system.
Yeah.
But it was actually
Probably they understood that if they didn't want to sell it, the Americans would take it. I'm not sure, but because in the end, the Americans paid a little bit for the Philippines, so it should look better.
Australia.
Australia was also empty.
Bryson, people from Bryson create some effective system, economic and economy, but Russian came.
Yeah. No, I think this is, and Australia was also empty, right?
Some light forms of feudalism, people from Bryson, but they can receive success in economic activity.
Yeah. No, and this is.
Russian is.
Perhaps we get to that.
This idea is imperialistic idea, but not.
Perhaps we can talk about that later when we talk about my idea was to talk about the Ukraine afterwards, and then maybe you have a heritage from a lot of places, maybe even from the Vikings, from the Mediterranean, from the Russians, and maybe this frakasamania, which I talked about last year, the cult of failure, is a trait from the Russians, right? Because I find that it's very much Latin American thing, but I also found it in Russia. And to move on with the US, someone says that their idea of fairness is very different from the European idea of fairness. Their idea of fairness is that everyone should have a ticket in the lottery, right? If you win or not, doesn't matter. Fairness is having a ticket to the lottery, right? So they, and that I think this is it's tied in some way to the
everybody has free ticket.
Everybody has a free ticket, but everybody can't win.
Yeah.
Right. So this for a long time I think made Americans not to worry so much about economic inequality. First of all, the poorest were really well off, right? Secondly, you didn't envy the rich because you said it could have been me, right? Could have been me. I also had a ticket to the same lottery. So and this is a very different. This is a very different mentality, and it's in a way reflected also in American law. That if you look at the bankruptcy law in Europe, especially traditionally, really punished people who went bankrupt, and it protected the banks from the risk of private enterprise. In America, the same laws are much more in favor of of the entrepreneurs. So it's harsher to the banks and fair to, and gives more leeway to the entrepreneurs. So they have something which is called Chapter 12, Chapter 11, and Chapter 12 in the bankruptcy code, which is sometimes come over. That means that essentially the company is bankrupt. But the U.S. courts say, well, it is in the interest of everyone that they are allowed to continue, even though they're bankrupt. So for a long time in the 90s, virtually all the airlines were in this Chapter 12. So the mentality is different, but very often you can trace the difference in mentality back to historical to historical events. And I had a professor in the United States in economics, a Czech guy, and he said that the promised land will always carry the characteristics of the vehicle that took you to the promised land. Meaning that, if communism comes to power through violence, all that violence will always be part of the system, right? And he used that on the United States and saying, the United States was based on the extreme unfairness of how they treated the Indians. So there is still this unfairness is part of the American structure. It's interesting. It's an interesting idea. I can't say I buy it, but by 100%. But it's an interesting thought. And if you think of democratic countries which by luck got to democracy without too much violence, like the Scandinavian countries, it's the theory jives. But there are other aspects with the United States which are important. This was a Pulitzer Prize winner in 1964. Richard Hofstede, I would call him a sociologist, I guess. But this is a book really worth reading. Anti-intellectualism in American life. How is it possible that the country with the best universities in the world actually have this trait of anti-intellectualism? And it's really true. Look at Trump, right? In Germany they would elect university professors to parliament. They would, and in America it's very different. So this is strange. This is strange and different from Europe. I mean, Europe varies a lot from one country to another, but respect for intellectuals, they may be impractical or whatever, but at least you don't have this anti-intellectualism, and that has to do with the kind of people also probably that left from England. The first ones, they were seeking, they were being prosecuted for their religion in England, so they were dissenters. John Harvard, who founded Harvard University with his collection of 329 books, he was a dissenter seeking religious freedom in the United States. Hofstede also wrote another book which is very interesting. I think Social Darwinism in American Thought. In the 1880s, there was a gentleman by the name of Herbert Spencer, an English philosopher, who was very famous and very influential, both in Europe and in the United States. And Herbert Spencer was the one who created the term survival of the fittest. It wasn't Darwin. it was Spencer. And if we try to explain it, it's, well, everyone had a chance. You could go there and if you didn't make it in Boston, you could go west, right? So if you lost, you were really a loser. So therefore the Americans have this idea of blaming the victims, it's been very nasty in the last 20 years. The unemployed are all of them are unemployed because they're lazy. I mean, when unemployment is going up in the United States is not because people are getting lazier and lazier. It has to do with economic conditions, right? So this is the nasty part of the United States. The good part is the risk taking and appreciating the risk taking and having this social plateau, which was very high because of the frontier which was there. But then you have the nasty things. And here is a quote from a Russian. He never really learned Russian, but an intellectual who went to the United States when he was 3. There's a cult of ignorance in the United States, and there always has been. The strain of anti-intellectualism has been a constant thread winding its way through our political and cultural life, nurtured by the false notion that democracy means that my ignorance is just as good as your knowledge. I mean, that is extremely powerful. And this was a very influential intellectual. And he came to, his parents were Jewish, and he went to the US when he was 3 years old, and was extremely influential. That is harsh, but that explains Trump, doesn't it? I mean, it's a very dangerous form of democracy. Yes?
I just wanted to say that American democracy, it was like an anti-aristocracy of Europe. It was built like antagonism of aristocracy, French, Germany and others, and they hate aristocrats. So they think that you're the same with those people. And as far as I know, Diotas said that stupid man wants just to live with pleasure. He doesn't want any duties. And it's like about democracy also, like aggressive democracy.
Yeah, and towards the end of the 19th century, big business started growing. And you got very powerful people, just like in Europe. And there was a really intellectual turnaround against big business in the 1890s. You got the antitrust laws, and you got an economist by the name of Thorstein Veblen, who was born in the United States in 1857, but his parents had just got there from Norway. And he wrote an incredibly influential book called The Theory of the Leisure Class in 1899, where he made fun of the wealthy Americans, how stupid they were with their money, and it was extremely ironical. He was killing the upper class by making fun of them. And he had a theory of the good things in capitalism, which was idle curiosity, not for-profit curiosity, like the children playing on the beach, and finding things. And then you had the instinct of workmanship. That there's an instinct in the human being of producing quality things. He thinks this was an built-in thing with human beings. And then something he calls the parental bent. And the parental bent had nothing to do with being a parent, but it had to be being part of a society, small family, big national society. So these were the positive things of human beings. And then there was a predatory instinct, and the predatory instinct was having something for nothing, was reaping where somebody else had sown. It was like parasites on society. And I think the best picture of Veblen was that somebody said he held up a mirror to American society and said, "Hey, you guys, you're becoming just like the feudal society that you left. Pull yourself together. This is not creating a new kind of industrial feudalism is not what we want." And Veblen was incredibly important, and he's worth he's difficult to read because he uses very difficult words, but he's useful. He's a useful character. So, what should we say about the Ukraine? If we say what are the influences of the Ukraine, and I know very little, but there was a suggestion from a gentleman who isn't here today. I don't think he isn't here, but I thought we could discuss that. Well, from my very superficial knowledge, you have, Norway is extreme periphery, and we didn't have any influences. Norwegian Vikings discovered America, and they came to Kiev, and the first Volodymyr, I read in a history book, who was kind of a Nordic origin, right? He was killed, and then his enemies came to negotiate with his wife, with his widow, and the widow said, "Well, I don't want to deal with dirty people, so you take a sauna before you come and talk to me." So they went in the sauna. She put the sauna on fire, and they all perished. That was a very Viking woman way of doing things. Think of these Vikings that were gone for years to Iceland, Greenland, America, and think of the women who were there and defended the farms. They were tough. So I thought this was wow. I recognize something here from the stories about Viking women. Those on the farm are a bit like this.
But you ask about Ukraine. I mean, you want our.
That's right. And I'm just saying the little things that I think. And there's a Mediterranean influence, and there's influence probably from Persia. There's an influence of Constantinople. There are influences all over, and this and also from Russia, clearly, right? And the fact that your language has been prohibited. When was it? First time by Catherine in 1752 or 53 or something like that, and then again by Stalin. This is something that really puts a mark on the nation, right? That somebody is trying to destroy your identity in a sense, right? So I don't know, Victor, could you perhaps lead a small discussion on this? What is it? Or
I'll ask Vladimir Panchenko to lead, if I may.
I think everybody can give his input into this. I would like to tell that what you offered as this frontier, nevertheless, Ukraine used to be frontier itself all the time, but we were not organizing the frontier. So this is considered to be the main problem of Ukrainian mentality, that we have not went through physical expansion. We have not, we didn't have physical expansion on land like Americans. We have not, with democratic, in a way, institutions which allow to grow this freedom of choice, and we had not the Russian variant of physical expansion, and we had not the variant of the Dutch or the others who had the expansion, overseas. But in any way, the idea which is now popular in intellectual circles, and the guys which lost the opportunity to talk to you, from the Wave political party new.
Well, I was there, they didn't come, huh?
Yeah, they called me, they need you and your thoughts, but this is their problem. They have lost their chance. So this group of intellectuals, they push the idea, which is in fact given in the book named Lost Nation, or Why Nations Fail. Why Nations Fail. Right? So, in fact, they explain, this book explains that nation failed because the institutions are not right, more or less. And there are many examples. But what the guys got from that is that idea of physical expansion, and if the nation does not have the experience of suppressing others, then it is suppressed by the other nation. So this prohibition of language and all that sort of things were later. I mean, last 300 years. But before, Ukrainians lost. I mean, they did not develop their identity as Russians did, or
those newcomers up in Moscow who were really latecomers compared to Kiev, right?
Absolutely. So I mean, Ukrainians. Instead of that's why I'm against this. You call it cultural expansion. I mean, Ukrainians did cultural expansion inside Moscow Empire because they thought that is enough, but that was not enough. So they were used as the investors. I mean, cultural and intellectual investors to develop empire, and then they were. Just how to say
subdued, or
that's it. So this is my, in fact, not my version, but the version of this intellectual group which I support. That the Ukrainians at the beginning, they did not have this experience of suppressing other nations. That's why they were suppressed by others, by Poles, by Austrians, by Russians. So different parts. And Ukrainians always lived, nevertheless, the ethnic status is different. I mean, different ethnic groups mixed here. But the nation itself was at the same place, never expanded. So there was always from Danube to Volga, from between those rivers, this nation stayed. Whatever it was, with Tatars mix or with the Mediterranean mix, but nations were melting here, never expanding, I mean, physically. So.
And often one explanation is for problems is a lack of physical borders, like Poland, right? Lack of natural borders. And how are you doing in terms of, so you have borders in the east, natural borders east and west, do you, or? But not north and south, or?
No. They explain about mountains. So if you have a mountain as a border,
or the sea,
or the sea.
Yeah. So this is
we never had the border between Moscow Empire and Ukraine. So that was easy.
And this is an explanation for countries that become very big and then shrink again, like Lithuania and Poland. You know, this is so that the geography also. Clearly matches. Well, that's.
But also Lithuania. If we talk about Lithuania, the principle of expanding this kingdom was not the imperialistic. That was not the empire, because they included the nations like the Habsburg Empire, like Austrian Empire. So it's very weak. So the nation does not have the experience again with Lithuanians. They do not have the experience to suppress others. That's why they suppress their own nations sometimes, like Russians. But the main thing, they do not have the experience to keep this together. So they collapse at the moment. Some other comes. Like maybe the others should talk about it.
Somebody who has not yet spoken.
But what about the psychological traits, maybe some imminent traits of the nation, and whether we can change or push the boundaries, and whether we have some bottlenecks on this side?
Yeah. Yes.
I just want to talk about one thing in Ukrainian spirit or mind. We cannot satisfy this half measure of freedom. We need to all freedom, full freedom, and that's why we build just in the road anarchist country of National Machno, and has roots with military state of Kosovs, where there was democracy, but they cannot organize it in some political structure because this freedom was so big and it goes out of any measures. So we cannot satisfy with European compromise democracy. We need to all of them. And we saw this in Maidan, Euromaidan. It was like an explosion of freedom where people self-organized then, and they don't need some power. So some anarchist things that can destroy also, not creative. And it's very...
Yes, this is one thing I thought about last time I was here. I was interviewed by two young women from a magazine, and it struck me that these people were, libertarians in the United States. They hate the state, but they love business. Right? But here you had a slightly different version, where people, the heritage from the Soviet system is that private enterprise is bad. So if you combine that with American neoliberalism, you get a kind of anarchy, a kind of liberalism which hates both business and the state. And there is a little bit of that in the US. They're starting to talk about the very far right corporate welfare. If the government helps the business, then it's called corporate welfare, and that's very bad. And the American Senate managed to close down the export-import ban, right? And this is, because they hate everyone except one individual, right? Except yourself, and I think that's an interesting aspect, and that made me think about Ayn Rand and the origins of neoliberalism. That she actually studied at the University of Petrograd in 1915 to 20 or something like that, which was a period of anarchy, right? And of course, anarchy is an interesting political movement.
Russians reportedly Russians.
That's right. But we said there's a political line from right to left, but in a sense, it's a circle, because the anarchists are very similar. The anarchists to the right and the anarchists to the left are very similar. And of course, to me, they're a big threat. I mean, it is very inconstructive. So, but what do you say, Victor, about the psychological things? Norway was united in the year 872, and the losers went to Kiev and to Novgorod. These Norwegian kings who lost the battle when the kingdom was united. And then, with the Black Death, there were so few of us, 400,000 or something, that we came and the royal family died out, and we came into Denmark for 400 years, which typically in Norwegian history is called the 400-year night, so there is this myth that the Danes were awful to us. That's not really true, but it's a nice myth to have for nation building, right? And then, during the Napoleonic Wars, Denmark was on the wrong side with Napoleon. So when Napoleon lost, part of the peace treaty was that Norway was shuffled over to Sweden, right? Which was the kind of the arch enemy, because when we were in Denmark, Sweden at one point actually cut Norway in two, in the middle where it's very narrow, right? And then during the late 1800s, you see this nationalistic movement growing, but it was a very positive kind of nationalism. I probably said that to you, somebody else, to some of you, that the patriots, the Norwegian patriots, would also be patriotic on behalf of others. So the biggest poet, Mr. Björnson, who got the first Nobel Prize in Literature in 1903, he would be the great defender of the Slovaks against the Czechs. you know, and the patriots, the Norwegian patriots, would go and defend Denmark against Germany. So it was somebody talks about poetocracy. This was a period of poetocracy, that the poets were running the place, and it was a positive nationalism. It was a nationalism that actually allows nationalism for everyone, right? And there were poems which were incredibly nationalistic, about the mountains, singing back, and then we found the Viking ships. Right? And the Viking ships were incredibly important in building national identity. So the wood carvings that were found on the Viking ships, they were building houses and restaurants and buildings with those wood carvings. Right? And there were several things in these Viking graves from the Black Sea. And we didn't look at that. We only looked at the Norwegian stuff, right? And actually, when they opened the grave, now that they had DNA, the most famous Viking ship, Oseberg from 820, they found that one of the two women buried there actually came from the Black Sea region. So maybe from this part of the world. So she might have been a Ukrainian, but we didn't see those. We didn't see the international aspects of the Vikings, of the European culture, which was very European, and people traveled a lot, etc., on the rivers, you know. Vikings came down on the rivers. The Swedish Vikings came down on the rivers, and the Norwegian Vikings came around and sailed to Constantinople via Gibraltar. And they kind of met at Constantinople. But the point here is that there was a very conscious nation building, digging up the old heroes, digging up, you know, the Vikings. And I think behind every nationalistic movement, I think a bit of this is healthy, right? If it's not, and this is what I'm thinking about the Ukraine. That's why I mentioned Dugan Baranovsky. You know, people who local people have been important. We had a similar thing in Estonia. Estonia was a free country between the two world wars. It was settled first by German feudal lords, so to say, right? And it was also, Tallinn was settled by the Danes. Tallinn means Tanska Linnat, the Danish city, right? So they were also subject of also a nation without natural borders, right? Sweden ruled for a few hundred years, and in Estonian, if you said, the way to say the good old days is to say the good old Swedish days. Because the Swedes were enlightened, and this was a period of enlightenment. They founded a university there in 1632. You know, we got the university in Norway in 1811, you know, 200 years later. So, there was an important development economist called Ragnar Nurkse. And Ragnar Nurkse was born, I was curious about him because his first name was Ragnar. And if you're Ragnar, you're either Swedish or Norwegian. So he proved that this guy was Estonian, but his mother came from the Swedish-speaking minority in Estonia. So we tried to re-establish, nobody had heard about it. You know, here people have heard about Dugan Baranovsky, but in Estonia, nobody had heard about Ragnar Nurkse. So we managed to get a stamp out in 2007, which was his the 100th anniversary of his birth. He died too young. He died in Geneva. He was working for the League of Nations, and we got kind of a monument to him where he was born, paid by the central bank, right? So, and we had a big conference, and now our institute is named after him, right? So I think this is a way of giving people, you know, helping people to find their own roots, right? And the problem with communism and neoliberalism has one important thing in common, that they are cosmopolitical theories. They disregard the nation state. And I think we had an ugly reaction to that in the 30s with fascism and Nazism, right? And they happened in the two last nations to become independent. Now, Germany got its own civil code, its own law for the whole Germany in 1897. Italy was united in the 1860s. So it's not by accident that this extreme nationalism came out in the countries that were the youngest ones to be united. So what I want to get at, and you know, one of the reasons for talking about the United States is well, how can we? I think every nation there's a possibility to dig out the best things and create an identity around it. And of course, I don't know because I don't know the language. I don't know how much there is of this, but there's probably more than I know. But I think in terms of economics, it would be a good idea to look at his ideas because he was into cooperatives, and this is probably, what are you going to put instead of huge, either if you sell the land to the Americans or to somebody, to the Koreans, I think you must not sell the land to foreigners. Right, and wheat is probably not a good idea for cooperatives, but a lot of crops are. Right, so bringing to Malinovsky back and the 3 years until this anniversary of his passing away. So that's just one idea. There's one idea, but it seems to me that this is what you need against Russians and against the Europeans. And this, just to finish, I think it's, Europe, the European Union has received you in a very bad way because they had a chance to save you from the Russians by making you wealthier, like the Marshall Plan, and they haven't got the message at all. So I think if there is something that we should try to communicate is to the Europeans that they're making a big mistake, right? There was a gentleman at the forum who came up to me and said that his company, which was a research company, had made a list of 400 products that could easily be produced in the Ukraine. That would be an extremely useful list. I gave him my email, but I didn't get his. Maybe you have an idea who it is. Because, we have to get production started, and I have this, remember my idea about the poultry business and the bush legs in Russia. That was a big success. How can we do similar things? Wheat and spaghetti. Selling wheat and buying spaghetti back. What can we do there? Yes, it was you first, I think. Yeah.
I suggest, in fact, 3 topics. One, I would like to continue with what you talk about nationalism. Modern Ukrainian nationalism is needed, but it has definitely 2 or 3 main obstacles. One is Russia blaming Ukrainian nationalism to be Nazism. It's an old story from the beginning of the 19th century. There was no word Nazis at that moment, but even Hitler, which I and you like, he told that there is good nationalism, which means nationalism of British, and the nationalism of Russians, which means imperial nations, and there is bad nationalism. At that moment, the nationalism of all the nations lower, who are conquered by those empires. So this is one problem. Second problem is European common home. In fact, 15 years ago, when the European community still to become one nation, to become one Habsburg empire with different communities, with different smaller nations, they did that. They tried to do that for the European, for new members, and also to try to do something for old members, and they also tried to do that for Ukrainians. And they put deep roots here with liberal society that we don't need consolidated nations, but we need just the communities thousands of communities which are controlled through Brussels. So now the idea to do anything from Brussels disappeared. So there's always this idea.
That was a neoliberal idea.
Yeah, but it stopped. It existed, but still in Ukraine the roots are still growing. That we don't need the consolidated nations. So that means we don't need modern nationalism. So this is the other problem, and the third problem to develop that, which I agree with you, with Dugan Baranovsky, but with other heroes on local level and on central level, there are lots of them in history of Ukraine, and it could be developed everywhere. The third is, globalization itself, which goes not from Europe now, because Europe was more or less concentrated on that idea that you have communities, you have small groups, and we just work with them like we did that in Poland with different regions of Poland. So globalism also does not like that, and also the global groups, they treat any roots of growing self-independence or self-respect, they call them immediately. They call them to be very negative. And the last thing, even the small nations like Poles, they try to break it. For example, we have a very bad case with the disaster of mass killings of Poles by Ukrainians in 1943. Now it's becoming sort of Holocaust number 2, where the Ukrainians are considered to be Nazis, and the Poles try to play, very stupid to my mind, play the game to blame Ukrainians and to try to push them into the situation where they have to ask forgiveness. So in any case, Poles try to organize their Holocaust scenario.
I've seen it in Kiev today. That it's
to play. So that means they increase bad nationalism.
That's right. Because I have a good Polish friend in Norway who's a medical doctor. He's been living in Norway for like 30 years. And he says that Polish nationalism is so ugly because it has been suppressed so long. Right? So what you get out now is all. And he says, perhaps it's best that it gets out to get some air into the room. But xenophobia is the opposite of the nationalism that I'm in favor of, right? The 19th century nationalism, which is that everybody has the same right to be nationalist, right? And the xenophobia that you get from the Poles here is awful. Absolutely. And it, in Brussels, I'm sure they deeply regret, getting Poland in there, because that nationalism is felt very, very much in Brussels as well. So it's that's a big problem. And how do you fight back?
It's possible to fight back because there is a need to do the more studies in the archives to show that this disaster was the consequence of 20 years of war between Ukrainians and Poles. So there is a ground. So from the beginning of Pilsudski, from coming of Pilsudski to power, there was all the time the war, hidden war between Ukrainians and Poles. So they killed each other all the time, and then after the situation changed, when there was why it happened. I don't want to take too much time, but just to finish, I have 2 other offers that we should.
Yeah, and I also have a plan.
Okay.
Yeah, but not for later, after this.
Yeah. So to finish with that, so there is a possibility, but this is also a bad thing because the last partner in Europe, Poland, broke this opportunity, and there was also the scenario that after the collapse of the European Union, there will be a belt from Lithuania, Poland to Ukraine, And Belarus, I mean, this new sort of state, quasi-state, but I doubt this would be possible. But I also would like to discuss with this, if you have time in your plan, Euroscepticism. What is the possibility to whether to think about that, and also your opinion about IMF and all those institutions we discussed. So,
and
it's a question.
Yeah, but you just as a parenthesis, you mentioned Belarus, right? MIT and Harvard, one professor at Harvard and one at MIT, made an atlas of complexity. So their idea was, back to Antonio Serra and Voltaire and these people, that what creates wealth is diversity of economic activities. Okay? So they made this atlas of complexity. And Norway, the newspapers started to call it because Norway got a very, very low score. And that was because the oil business had killed a lot of other businesses, which was nasty. But guess who almost got the top score? Belarus. and maybe Belarus is the example that having an inefficient manufacturing sector is much better than having none. So it's I've never been there, but I think it's an interesting, if you try to forget about the political system. That's not what I want to talk about, but the economic structure of Belarus, that's worth a study.
Absolutely, moreover, their GDP per capita 2 times higher than Ukraine.
So that way, if we manage to separate the economic from the political issues, that in a way is the proof of the pudding of the failure of the last 25 years here, right? I think this is so that's something we should try to find somebody who knows about it.
I just want to. You were talking about digging up past heroes, and I just think that we have a variety of choice what person we can choose like a hero of the past, and creating this new methodology of our history, creating our future, because we programming our future with these heroes. And in Russia now, they creating their methodology with Stalin on the top, but they could choose like Vita or someone else, and they are programming their future with these heroes or great persons. And for example, if we choose Ivan Baranovsky, his cooperative ideas and others, this how we can choose of our picture of future.
And the Russians could choose Chianov, who is probably, I'm not an agricultural economist, but agricultural economists tell me that he was the one who understood how the different crops should be organized. He really understood agricultural economics. But he's a Russian, so we don't want to talk about him. But Kondratiev, the student of Ivan Baranovsky, could also be a hero in understanding capitalism. But let's leave that. Then talk about the Russians. Yes. Yes.
And maybe some kind of European project like Hetman Skoropadsky in historical perspective about our past heroes.
Yeah.
We don't know maybe about such period, but it was our unrealized manner game, like in Finland. In the beginning of 19th century, Hetman Pavlo Skoropadsky, 1918, yeah. And it was our Ukrainian kind of manner game, but according to some historical and geopolitical aspects, we can't realize in such kind, not neoliberalistic, not communistic, but sound European society like Finland and like German with industry. It was our historical experience, and we remind about only nationalism, ultra-right, all ultra-left, all many interested and realized in materialized form anarchism by Barca Macron, but we have also the same experience. And democracy, good example of.
And also the story about.
We have different civilization projects.
And the ethnic groups that never got their nation state, like the Tatars. This is. I had a student in Yekaterinburg. About 8 years ago, I was teaching there, and he was a Tatar, and he a brilliant young man, and he wanted to write the history of the Tatars. He was a blonde Tatar, well, this is something that Western Europe, because of the Iron Curtain. There is so much Western Europe doesn't know about Eastern Europe. For instance, I didn't know that the cultural center of Germany for hundreds of years was in East Germany. Nobody told us that, right? So Weimar and Gotha and these cities, this was the cultural center of Germany, but we didn't know. So there is also an educational job to be done with the rulers in Europe, right? Everything they don't know, and I think this is something we should also keep in mind. But if we have finished the discussion about nationalism, I don't know how far we can get, because I'm very ignorant about it. I'm just saying that there's a good nationalism and there's a bad nationalism, which is xenophobia, right? And that is that's what we want to try to avoid. So I was thinking a brief resume of what we have done so far, what we did yesterday, with perhaps a new angle, and then we have a break. Okay? So we were saying that, I was talking about the cyclicality of economics. I don't think we showed this one yesterday, did we? No. The idea that economic theory is cyclical, Kene and physiocracy, the rule of nature. And the rule of nature was the market. And Mr. Kene was the physician of the French king, and he represented the farmers. And the farmers wanted free trade in grain, but the problem was that these farmers actually made money by withholding grain from the market, and that created a shortage of bread in Paris and the French Revolution. Right? So this is what we would call speculation. And you can read the newspapers at the time saying, well, there's a free market, it's impossible that there can be a shortage. And there was a shortage because of speculation. And this is, again, similar to what we have now. And if you really go back in history, you find that in Florence, which was an island of a civilized state in the middle of feudal states, if you go back to the year 1200, they had laws prohibiting taking food out of the city. Strange law, but the law was obvious because when we see what happened there, it was to prevent speculation. If you saw that prices were going up and you managed to move food out of the city, prices would explode and you could make a lot of money. So this speculation, and that's what we get here after the break, and the financial sector. Classical economics, Ricardo, 1817, is free trade. His theory of free trade and comparative advantage, peaks in the 1840s, repeal of the Corn Laws in 1846. Then you have a bad, first of all, you have a very bad financial crisis in England in 1847, and then you have a bad year in harvest from Finland down to Spain in 1848. And that is what creates the 1848 revolutions, right? So this is why I call it in the 1848 moment what we have now. I don't want a revolution, but just that people change their mind. And then you have neoclassical economics, neoclassical synthesis, Paul Samuelson, 1848, peaks in the 1990s, and it dies now. So I think this is the big picture. And the fact that Sanders and Trump are essentially saying the same things about free trade, I think is very, very important. The model doesn't work even at the core. And this, I think, is a very important argument. If it doesn't work in the United States, how could it work here? Come on. So the 1848 moment when the old order collapses because it's attacked from the political right and the political left at the same time. Unusual, but this is the Trump-Samuelson. The overly abstract theories collapse, and the old elites are under attack from all sides. There was an English lawyer writing in his memoir saying that if you went to sleep in 1846 and woke up in 1848, you woke up in a completely different world. Right? And this is I think we're seeing now. And this quote from John Stuart Mill: "It often happens that universal beliefs of one age of mankind, a belief from no one was, nor without an extraordinary effort of genius and courage, could at the time be free, becomes to subsequent age so palpable an absurdity that the only difficulty then is to imagine how such a thing can ever be credible. It looks like one with crude fancies of childhood, instantly corrected by a word from any grown person." You know, if we get free trade between Silicon Valley and the tribes in the Amazon, do we think that they will get equally rich? I mean, this is absurd, right? Therefore, I think it is in a way important to point at the absurdity of the thing. And when I try to explain comparative advantage to people, I say, well, imagine there's a village on each side of a river, near, or one river, and then they're both in the Stone Age. Right? And then the people on the left bank see that the people on the right bank have new tools. They're into the Bronze Age. Right? They have tools made from bronze and no longer from stone. So then you have a choice as a tribal council on the west bank. You know, do you try to emulate? Do you try to copy the tools of the Bronze Age, or do you say no? My comparative advantage is in the Stone Age. Okay, you say your comparative advantage is in the Stone Age. And then the Bronze Age, they go into the Iron Age, and they go into the Industrial Age, and whatnot. But you still have a comparative advantage in the Stone Age. Right? And economic theory tells you to stay in the Stone Age. You know, this is the absurdity of Ricardian theory. If you think about it, it's an insult to common sense. But the problem is that we have two generations of economists now who grew up with this. You know, they for the first 3 or 4 or 5 years, this is what you hear. And then in the 5th year, when you were completely brainwashed, or you're allowed to use different assumptions, right? But then you have been brainwashed into this irrelevant theory. So, and I'm enthusiastic because I think this 1848 moment is coming. And some of you saw this, Marx and Engels, 1848, 3 books, Marx and Engels, Communist Manifesto. Marx was asked about free trade once, and he said, I am very much in favor of free trade, because if you have free trade in the wrong situation, it will produce a revolution. So Marx was in favor of free trade because it would bring poverty and revolution. He fled to England, Hildebrand, another German economist who was so conservative he had to flee to Switzerland in 1851, and then you had John Stuart Mill. You've seen this before. And what I think you should dig out of this is John Stuart Mill's idea of infant industry protection. That a businessman knows that a company cannot, in the first 4 years of a production company, you know, companies don't make any money. So, and it's just like that with the whole industrial sector. It doesn't make any money, so you have to protect it until it can stand on its own feet. So, it's always I found it very useful to use people's heroes against them. Right? So with English liberalists, you use their own theorist, John Stuart Mill, against them. We saw this, remember, this productivity explosion, and this is what I talked to you about, but I don't think I showed you the effect of diminishing returns. Ecuador, can we get this sharper? Is it this one? Well, yes. Diminishing returns in bananas. The 1960s, very good. Wow. There was a disease of the bananas in Central America. So, production collapsed. So this was a chance for Ecuador to increase the share of the world market in bananas. So you see, they cultivated more and more land, went up from 90,000 to about 180,000. They doubled the area under bananas. But look at productivity. The yield per hectare is a mirror image of the area cultivated. This is not surprising to agricultural economists. But the point is that there's only one province in Ecuador, Provincia del Oro, which is really suited for bananas. And if you go outside that, it's not so suited anymore. So this is what's happening if you produce wheat. You're going to run into diminishing returns. This was the argument for industrialization in Australia, that we should only produce wool, but if we produce wool, we will go into areas of diminishing returns, where it's not so efficient, and then our wages will fall. So the only way to stop wages from falling, said the Australians, is to have an industrial sector, because the industrial sector would set a minimum wage for the whole country, so that people would not move with the diminishing returns into poverty. This is very important. And the English 19th century economists, they understood the diminishing returns very well. They didn't understand increasing returns, but this is very important. And you see here, when they're back to the same area, you see this production is a bit higher. It's a bit higher here than there, and that's technological change or improvement of crop. But that's completely dwarfed by the diminishing returns, right? So yes, you have improvements, but the improvements are completely dwarfed by the diminishing returns. And this is an important drawing. This is the productivity explosion from a different angle. Learning curves. And the learning curve plots the number of labor hours you need to produce a product. There's something called experience curve, and the experience curve, you plot the total costs. So here in 1850, in the United States, it took 15.5 hours to produce a pair of shoes. In 1900, 1.7, 1923, 1.1, and then 1936. You see how it flattens out, right? So this is like the productivity explosion. And rich countries produce where the learning curve is steep, and they import, they export where the learning curve is steep, and they import where the learning curve is flat. And this is automatic in a sense, because when the learning curve is steep, wages is not very important, and skills are important, so you can pay high wages. Here, technology is well known, and the wage level becomes a crucial variable. When there's no technological change, you compete on lowering wages. Here you compete on new technology, right? So, United States exported shoes here and started importing shoes there, right? And this is the curse of the poor countries. This is Mexico. Mexico has an interesting trade statistic, wage statistics, because they have a wage statistics for normal industry, and then especially after NAFTA, in North American Free Trade Association in 1994, they had the so-called maquilas. And a maquila is superficial industrial production which is found on the border, the northern border of Mexico to the United States. And there, the Americans export everything. Well, they send the things that become wage sensitive, where there's no more learning. When there's no more learning, they send these goods to produce in Mexico, because it's sensitive to wages, right? And Mexicans have cheaper labor. So the maquilas in northern Mexico have much lower wages than traditional industrial sector in Mexico. But the traditional industrial sector in Mexico is dying out, right? And they get more and more specialized in this area. So Trump complains about how bad deal Mexico is, or NAFTA was for the United States. I would say it was even worse for Mexico, right? Because even in agriculture, wheat production, which is mechanizable, moved from Mexico to the United States. Tomato production and strawberry production, which is very manual, moved from the United States to Mexico. So the Mexicans specialized in being poor and in doing unmechanizable things. This is very crucial, right? Wheat is mechanizable, strawberries are not. Right? So even inside agriculture, these activities are very different. So this is well, you produce wheat, but it's a commodity, but at least it's not. You don't handpick it, right? With tomatoes. So here is an important part of my theory, which is that economic activities are qualitatively different, and I've produced this quality index of economic activities more than 20 years ago, and I'm saying that there is black, and between black and white, there are many shades of gray, obviously. And economic theory, standard economic theory, assumes perfect competition. It assumes that the barriers to entry into business is zero. Right? So the strange thing is that economic theory assumes a world where nobody is making much money, or any money at all. So in a sense, economic theory is made for wheat. It's not made for Bill Gates, because Bill Gates is up here with dynamic imperfect competition. So the high quality activities have new knowledge with high market value, steep learning curves, high growth in output, rapid technological progress, high R&D content, learning by doing, imperfect information. Investments come in large chunks. That's very important. Remember we talked about the house painter. The house painter has a very low quality activity. But if you wanted to make a new drug, medicine, that's a big product which makes it imperfect, very imperfect competition. And it's also patented, right? High industry concentration, high wage level, barriers to entry, branded products, produces linkages, produces innovation, and the standard neoclassical assumptions are irrelevant. So the shoes used to be up here, now they're down there. And if you look at baseballs for the American sport, baseballs are still hands-on. And they used to be made in Haiti, now they're made in Costa Rica and Nicaragua. And they paid $1 an hour at best. Both balls are fairly high-tech. So what you pay for the wages is not important, and you need engineers. So the most important, the most efficient golf ball producers in the world are in the United States. New Bedford, Massachusetts, last time I looked at it. And they make $18 an hour. And these people who are the most efficient producers of baseballs make $1 an hour, right? So this has been the theory of economic development all the time. This was development economics in the 1970s. The stuff I was trying to teach in Latin America in the 1970s, that you have to move up to these high quality activities, right? And house paint is something that it's very easy to do. There are hundreds of companies only in Southern California. Automotive paint, paint for cars is much more complicated. There are thousands of colors, the quality is important. You have metallic colors which are very difficult. So there are only a handful of producers in the world who do full range of automotive paint. So the problem with this is that you have to go into. You cannot say this sector is so and so. You know, the paint sector is very different inside it, and the balls for American games is also very different. So it's complicated, right? But if we go back to Belarus, I think what happened in Belarus was that, you know, they stayed up here, but in very inefficient versions, right? They produce these high-tech things, but in a very inefficient way. But the important thing here is that it makes them, what you said, twice the GDP.
Twice GDP,
yeah,
in real terms.
Twice the GDP in real terms to stay up here being an inefficient producer of industrial goods, right? And of course, you know, probably if you got a little more technology, you could improve it in Belarus. But I think this idea is, I think, coming to maturity. But it's going to kill Ricardian trade theory as it was killed after 1848. And by the year 1900, Ricardo was completely dead. He was out of the textbooks, but now he's back again, right? So it's this abstract series coming up and down. And unfortunately, there was a question yesterday about German economics. Unfortunately, many of these economists that were kind of demolished Ricardo, they were Germans. And unfortunately, they disappeared after World War II, and that's a problem. So I was thinking, if we stop here and have a break, and then let's first questions to this, and then if you have any questions, and then we look at the financial sector in the end, which I. Okay, let's have a break. Okay, there was a financial crisis starting in 2007, and we're still living from the results of it. There was a huge financial crisis in 1929. The American economy collapsed, and the US economy collapsed. But since then, there has been no big financial crisis. And this was because in the early 1930s, the Americans, it's on but it's cold, huh? The Americans created the Glass-Steagall Act, and the Glass-Steagall Act essentially separated speculation from normal banking, right? And then in the 1990s we had spectacular economic growth because of the, in the West and in the United States, because of the information technology, and we had Mr. Alan Greenspan, who was head of the Federal Reserve, and Mr. Greenspan had one very strong point in his favor, was that when the economy of the United States was heating up in the early 1990s, people were screaming, "Oh, we're going to have high inflation, we have to stop this growth." And Mr. Greenspan said, "No, those of us who have read our Schumpeter understand that this is a period of very strong economic growth, so we can actually growth in productivity, so we can actually print money, and it doesn't create inflation because the cake is growing so fast." So that was a great intuition from Mr. Greenspan that he actually saw this, but he didn't stop. He didn't contract the American economy so that this flourishing could actually happen. But then we have to say that Mr. Greenspan, on the other hand, was a very important student of Ayn Rand, of this Russian woman who lost her family, lost their property during the revolution, and she went to the United States and she became, the leader of the first leader of the creator of neoliberalism, so to say. And he was very close to her. He went to one of the closest collaborators. He went to her funeral, etc., etc., and that made him not see the perils of the financial economy. And in 1999, people were saying, well, we don't need this Glass-Steagall Act because we don't have a financial crisis. So why do we need the Glass-Steagall Act? So in 1999, they abolished that act, and then they found out that, well, the reason they didn't have a financial crisis was that they had the Glass-Steagall Act, right? And so this is a case of really political mismanagement, so to say. But financial crises are quite frequent. I went into the press library at Harvard Business School when my wife, who is a librarian, was working when I was studying in the United States. And I looked at, this is a library only consisting of economics books before 1850. And if you go in there and you count the number of books published every year, you see that in some years there is a tremendous growth in the number of books published. That's when you have financial crisis. So if you're a very lazy researcher and want to look for financial crisis, you count books. I call this it's like a volcanic eruption, right? 1720 was the first financial crisis that hit all of Europe at the same time. It hit London, Amsterdam, and Paris. And the mechanisms are fairly similar. The crisis, well, I'm jumping to something else now. Remember this one. In good times, the financial sector is a bridge in time. You need money for your education, for building a house, for building a factory, and the real economy goes to the financial economy in order to get funds. And it works very well, they are in symbiosis. One lives from the other, and it works well. Then sometimes the financial sector gets too creative. Hyman Minsky, the theorist, who spent a lifetime saying it will happen again, the financial crisis, and he died a year before the Asian crisis, he said that one important mechanism of the crisis is that there is too much innovation in here. That actually the banks are able to create more money than the real economy can use in a profitable way. So in a sense, it's over liquidity. I mean, they are too creative. Finance is good, and creation is good, but you can be too creative. And then this financial sector starts growing, but at the expense of this sector. So actually, the financial sector can become a parasite on the real economy, right? And this is what happened with the financial crisis. So some people were saying, well, this is very boring. You lend money and you wait for 30 years and you get your money back. Very boring. So people were saying, now we have to make finance boring again. It was just too great. And there's several mechanisms leading up to this, but the picture becomes more like this. The financial sector is like Pac-Man game, right? The old-fashioned Pac-Man game. The financial sector is 17,899, and the real economy 0. This is the financial sector eating away at the Greek economy. You know, you have to give us 20% more of your GDP. You have to close the factories and privatize Acropolis or whatever, right? This is when it becomes a parasite. And in practice, the West told the financial sector, just create as much liquidity as you wish, and lend the funds to anyone you please. If you should lend money to individuals, subprime loans or nations that do not pay back, don't worry, we'll send the bill, just send the bill to us in the real economy. That's what we're essentially saying. You know, do your speculation, and if they fail, well, the real economy will take the bill. And a very important thing here is that the perverse incentive. You know, the financial sector gets all the upside of the business. You know, when they make money, they get the money. But when they lose money, they send the bill to someone else. And this perverse incentive, you know, if you flip a coin, you know, head I win, tail you lose. You know, it's you know, they win anyway. And this is the perverse incentive. And you can, I found an illustration of that. This picture, Mario Draghi and Mario Monti, both came, the Italian Prime Minister, Mario Monti, they both came from Goldman Sachs. And you see this picture with Merkel and Sarkozy saying, you know, just create as much liquidity as you want, you know, do what you want. They abdicate from controlling Goldman Sachs. And an important point here is the role of Goldman Sachs has been very destructive. You know, we know that Greece was allowed to enter into the European Union because they showed that they had a very low deficit. Right? But the low deficit was a lie. And it was a lie produced by Goldman Sachs. So Goldman Sachs went into the Greek books and they faked the Greek books so it looked as if Greece didn't have a deficit. Right? And that was the beginning of the disaster. And who was the head of Goldman Sachs Europe at that point in time? Mario Draghi. Right. And imagine that if everyone thinks that Greece has no problem with its debts, and you, Goldman Sachs, are the only one in the world who know that they have big problems because you cheated the books. Imagine how much money they can make if they sit on that knowledge. They can short sell Greek debt and make a fortune. So you know, I think Mario Draghi seriously is a con man. He's we'll get back to him. He grew up in Italy in an inflationary period and hates inflation, just like the Germans. So the Germans managed to find an Italian who hated inflation even more than they did. And if we have time, I'll tell you Mario Draghi's story. So this is again this cyclical thing. This is from a book that was published in 1949 by Keynes' predecessor. The book is called The Vein of Money. In the years preceding First World War, there was a common use among economists a number of metaphors. Money is a wrapper in which goods come. Money is a garment draped around the body of economic life. So, you know, money was an innocent thing. And then it says, during the 20s and 30s, money, the passive veil, took on the appearance of an evil genius. The garment became a necessary shirt, the wrapper a thing liable to explode. Money, in short, after being little or nothing, was now everything. In case you do not have a PhD in Greek mythology, the necessary shirt is a poisoned shirt. Right? It's something which poisons you if you put it on. And then, when the Second World War, the tune changed again. Manpower, equipment, and organization once more came into their own. The role of money dwindled to insignificance. So now, I think we are in a period resembling the middle period, right? this Swedish guy who annoyed me so much from the EU. He said, well, if you just behave, we'll give you more money, right? And money is everything, and production is nothing, right? And I think this is also a turnaround that we'll experience, that we'll get back to. Mr. Piketty, in famous book, talks about war being the mechanism. And it isn't the war in itself, it's just that wars makes people concentrate on production. You know, production of airplanes and tanks and things like that. So, if you understand the mechanism, you don't have to declare war on your neighbor, you can declare war on the seas, or you could conquer the moon or whatever. The important thing is to produce something, right? And the unfortunate thing is that war often becomes that mechanism. But it doesn't have to be. Once you see the mechanism, you can do it otherwise. And the fire sector, finance, insurance, and real estate becomes a parasite on the real economy. You know, this is what's a tool in symbiosis between the two the fire sector becomes a parasite. And here is a recent book of an interesting American economist, Killing the Hosts, how financial parasites and debt destroy the global economy, and he's found this wonderful picture with a fish being killed by the parasite. Michael Hudson is he's 10 years older than I am, and I met him early in the 90s in a conference in Germany, and he started talking about financial crisis and things like that. And I thought it was interesting, but it was only theory. And then suddenly, you get the financial crisis, and you understand that this is much more than theory. Peru is a country where I lived. I lived for a while and a couple of years, and I'm coming back. I guess I've been to Peru on the average of every year for the last 40 years, so I know the place pretty well. This is 100% is the composition of GDP. This is Peruvian GDP. From 1950 to 1990, because in 1990 they stopped producing this data. The Central Bank of Peru just stopped producing the data. So you see here is profits. This is the municipal tax, don't worry about it. This is the income of the self-employed. The farmers, the street vendors, and these are wages. So up until the mid-1970s, Peru had a classical development strategy, import substitution, industry was growing, and you see wages as a percentage of GDP was growing. It was, getting up to close to 60%. And profits, the financial sector, the fire sector is in here, was relatively low. And then comes a free trade shock, similar to the Russian and Ukrainian free trade shock. And what you see is profits take over and become 50% of GDP. And the self-employed, the farmers, the street vendors, their part shrink and wages shrink considerably. So I think this is what happens with short term. And it will be interesting, few countries have this, but one should really dig more to have this data from other countries as well. And I think they were so ashamed that they stopped publishing the data. But the financial sector is taking over. Here there's a good balance, right? And then finance takes over. And this is the story of Russia. Hopefully, I get it. Well, when was it? 2010. I was approached by a a Russian magazine called Expert. I think they used to have an edition in Ukraine as well. Mr. Fadeev. And if we could write a piece on the Russian economy. And I contacted one of my colleagues in Italy who knows Russian, and the first thing we tried to do was to get data, because there was no good data. For 1992, there was really no good data in Russia. There was good data in Mongolia, but not in Russia. So we tried to reconstruct what actually happened. And I think this is interesting because it's probably similar to the Ukraine. So one could try to do a similar story. This is the index of industrial production from, I lost the axis here, but this is 1992 and this is 2001, okay? So you see that industrial production rate was reduced by 50%, right? Well, that we kind of knew. But what we didn't know was the index of agricultural production had a similar development. That I didn't know. It wasn't only the industrial production that suffered, but also the production of potatoes or everything else. And then comes this, which is the real average monthly accrued wages. And you see, as the economy opened up for a while, wages went up. And then they take a big jump, and then they kind of flat, and then they collapse. And then after a period of a couple of years, they start growing again. And if you look at this, there's nothing really explaining what's happening until you put in the real exchange rate against the US dollar. We know that in communist times the ruble was very undervalued, right? That we knew. So that the exchange rate went up wasn't that surprising. But here something happens. The real economy is collapsing, and the value of the ruble skyrockets. That makes absolutely no sense. It makes absolutely no sense. You can say, well, it's the price of oil, yes. Probably there's oil in there. But still, So in whose interest is it that the ruble skyrockets while the economy collapses? Well, if I was the Mercedes dealer in Moscow, I would love this. Because the Russian cars become terribly expensive, and you can import the cars become cheap. This is the opposite of import substitution. This is export substitution, whatever you want to call it. And if you were, but here at this point, state companies were very cheap, right? You could buy, the Norwegian journalist who spent 20 years or 30 years in Moscow said you could buy a state company in Moscow for the price of an average house outside Oslo. They were very cheap. Right? So if you manage to get these cheap companies and wanted to get the money abroad, you would be interested in having the ruble very valuable. That will help you get as much dollars and pounds. If you wanted to buy English football clubs and houses big houses in London, this is in your interest. Right? And then this is August 1998. The whole thing collapses. A Russian economist who I know, who was the dean of the Paris School of Economics, the people who published my book in Russia, he told me he had saved money to buy a car, and 4 days later he could buy a bicycle for that money. And this is kind of an opposite shock therapy. And you see, in the beginning, after this, you see that the wages fall very rapidly. because everything becomes more expensive. But then, relatively soon, Russian goods are again competitive, so real wages start going up. Right. So I think this is an important mechanism to think about for you as well, because I think probably something similar happened. I don't know what. Did you have a currency collapse like that, or yes?
3 times.
Yes, and you see, inflation and devaluation seem like superficially like a very bad thing, but when you look at this, you know, devaluation and following inflation is in a sense healthy. And you have had countries like Brazil, which have had hyperinflation for decades, and they still developed very well. But what they did was to index everything. So the real interest rate was 0.4% plus inflation. So everything was indexed. Wages, salaries, bank accounts, loans, deposits, everything was indexed. So you can live with inflation. You know, it's much better to have inflation and industry than to not to have inflation and not have industry. And if you look at the countries which got very high inflation early on, it was the most democratic countries in Latin America. It was Costa Rica and Chile. So here is my kind of political explanation of inflation. Is that governments under pressure who want to do as much as possible for the people, they have such an expansion in the budget that they create inflation. Right? And a dictator, if you know Mr. Stroessner in Paraguay or Mr. Duvalier in Haiti, they never had inflation. So when I traveled around the world in Latin America in the 70s, when I left Chile or Ecuador or Costa Rica, I always exchanged my money. Because I knew that next time I came back, it would be worth much less. But I always kept the Paraguayan Guaranis because next time I came back to Paraguay, Mr. Stroessner was still in power, you know, the exchange rate would still be 132 to the dollar. So there is this political thing about inflation. And this, when we get to Draghi, I'll try to explain that as well. But I showed this at the Gaidar conference in January 2015. I was invited to, and I showed this graph. And the chairman of the meeting said, I think we should send Mr. Rainer's graph to the prosecutor's office. Right? Because, you know, here is something very fishy going on. Right? An interesting thing is that the Harvard Institute of International Development, led by Mr. Jeffrey Sachs, was involved in this. And there was a Russian economist involved. And the Department of Justice actually took action against, you know, the US Department of Justice took Harvard University to court and demanded $25 million back from what they've given to the Institute of International Development. Because these Harvard economists had been clearly involved in this. We'll never know what happened, because the settlement was that, okay, Harvard pays, they close the institute, and nobody will ever know. But there was something very fishy here. And somebody was making, you know, if you knew that this was going to happen, you could make fortunes, right? Like with the Greek was. So, you see, this gradual growth here, after the evaluation, I think is important. So the exchange rate is crucial. But what are your comments on this? Is it, you know, how similar is it?
I think that it's not bad for economy if we have, for example, devaluation of the currency, if we have the complex of conditions in order to support industry. So we have some kind of export facilitation, infrastructure, we have some investment stimulus, we have property rights protection, so on and so on. Because what we really have, we have even worse devaluation and inflation, but at the same time we have production decline. And if we build the correlation between GDP per capita and commodity price index, we will find that the coefficient of determination is as high as 95%. So actually this is the very problem. So just the devaluation or devaluation shock is for our economy, it's a very bad thing because it is not supported by a deliberate and well thought economic policy in order to get benefits from this devaluation.
But if you, the destructiveness of this high exchange rate, you see, production is cut by 50% because of this overvalued exchange rate. So that will be interesting, and somebody benefits from that, right? Somebody benefits from it, and if you have this overvalued exchange rate as well, because normally the normal mechanism is of course that when an economy is doing poorly, well, they have a trade deficit, and the value of the currency goes down. So this is exactly the opposite of the normal.
Also, it shows that in discussions, when we talk about the weaker currency exchange rate, weaker currency, your local currency, usually they thought you have weaker currency, that means you have more exports, that means you have more production. So without figures, without the picture of this weaker or stronger, it's not possible to tell. So here we see that if weaker means much weaker than what you told about this greedy guys earned money because they knew what they will do. But this shows that, for example, when we discuss things with the neoliberals or with the guys who are liberals, normal liberals, they say, look, what's bad about drastic change of our currency? That will increase exports. I even heard that in 2014, many people applauded that, look, we have devaluation of currency, now we have much opportunities for export, but we have the opposite.
That's right, because there was no alternative. You have devaluation with some policies, right? And I don't know much how policies they have in Russia, but I think it's interesting, the very short period there when wages fall after devaluation, and how soon they pick up, and the pickup is kind of smooth, right? Although they didn't have brilliant policies. But they were also a big economy, and perhaps more was still in place. I don't know. Yes?
I have a friend in a big mall that sell construction products, epicenter in Ukraine, and 2 years ago when Ukrainian hryvnia was 3 times stronger, they sell mostly import products. It's not Ukrainian. But now, during 2 years, they a lot of products are made by Ukrainian factories, and it's furniture, other production, some products.
So it works. It works in Ukraine as well.
What's interesting that the quality of these products during 2 years became more good.
That's right. Because the classical argument against the spaghetti. Why do you sell wheat and import spaghetti that costs 100 times more? The classical Latin American argument is that, but the Italian spaghetti is better. Well, I say, try to make a competition between Ukrainian producers of spaghetti, right, to get it up. But that's your choice. Perhaps your spaghetti will not be as brilliant as the Italian one, but then let those who want to have put a tariff on it, and let those who want Italian spaghetti pay the double. No problem. But this is what this discussion about the quality of products which you raise is what went on in Latin America for like 30, 40 years. So it's a well-known discussion, but I'm glad it's a positive method.
Complex view on such problem. We have great level of polarization of economy. And the particular way, shadow economy we use about polarization and credit, part of credits in dollars show many borrowers can face such credit. It's a great problem. And from the other side, we must understand that we should not see only one side. The only devaluation is destroy the health of economic health of our another parts of the economy. But the key point of solution to those problems is development of real estate and high productive real estate. With best quality will increase currency cash flow in our economy better, not currency, real backed by real products, better than only place with currency exchange rates.
And you're touching on an important point here, dollarization. Do not dollarize, please. That's the worst thing you can do. Or adopt the euro. If you look at the success, Poland is relatively successful, and I think they perhaps we get to that. But one thing is that they never collectivized agriculture, so they kept the family farms, and family farms are very, very useful for underemployment, because when times are good in the cities, the people leave the farm and they work in the cities. When times are bad in the cities, they go back to the farm. There is one more hand in the potato field. It's not very protective, but at least they're not in the slums. Right? That's one strength of Poland. 1956, Mr. Gomulka, who refused to collectivize. This is important, because once a family farm is lost, once that institution is lost, I think it is very difficult to recreate it. You can do it via cooperatives or something like that, but it's very difficult. The second of all is that they kept the zloty. And the European Union has tried to force them into the euro, and they cleverly refuse. Right? There's some more or less successful dollarization. But if you give up your currency, you give up your whole toolbox. You become a victim of other people's policy. But if you are El Salvador, and 90% of your exports go to the United States, and 90% of imports go to the United States, the risk is lower, right? But there's some Ecuador dollarized, not very successful. And when the oil prices collapsed, and the Ecuador should have devalued, they cannot devalue, so they left with a very, very high cost level, even though their income collapsed. So this is the risk of the dollarization. And the worst case is Zimbabwe, which had an awful inflation. And they cleverly asked South Africa if they could join the currency sector, if they could join with the rand. And South Africa refused. So they dollarized. And what happened? After that, all the countries around Zimbabwe devalued heavily. South Africa devalued, all the other countries devalued. So suddenly Zimbabwe was left there with an extremely high, extremely expensive productive sector. And the biggest industry became smuggling. I've traveled around Zimbabwe, and the only businessman I met who was happy was one producing ice cream. Because nobody smuggles ice cream in the tropics, right? So he was the only one. He was not touched by this petty smuggling across the border. So, I think the risk of, you're not in the situation of an El Salvador. You are in a situation where you trade with a lot of people. And tying up with one sector is very dangerous. And I think while I'm at it, what's also very dangerous is to sell productive land to foreigners. Right? We know that South Korea is buying up land in Africa like there was no tomorrow. So if you lose control of your own land and what is produced, you risk getting into what I call the Easter Island syndrome. Easter Island, in the middle of a small island in the Pacific, was bought up by an English company in the 1860s, and they decided to make the whole island into a big sheep farm. So they forced the inhabitants to live in the city, and they produced lamb, mutton, but they couldn't afford to buy the food they were producing themselves. And this is the Easter Island syndrome, and that's the danger of giving away control of the land to foreigners. So this is one possibility. If this is an issue, there is a gentleman at Tufts University who has written a lot about these the problems of countries losing their land to foreigners. So if it's an issue, he could be invited. But but I think this was yes.
Professor, I think it's a very central point for us because we currently have the public debt around 80% of GDP. But it's much worse than, for example, Japan having over 200% of GDP, because our public debt become more and more dollarized and dollar and euro, and so this is huge tension on our budget, and this is what you're just talking about. We cannot devaluate our hryvnia without risk, and without not even risk, but without the definite consequences of paying more to other countries. So, and this is the issue which are not properly discussed and properly considered by the government, because they're telling, why shouldn't we borrow from other countries, because they're just giving us 2% bank rate or something like that. It's so cheap, and okay, let's take these loans, IMF loans, and new macrofin loans, and so on and so on. And they're asking us, or they're pushing us to eliminate the ban for the timber export, and so on and so on. We should make the step in order to get another loan and so on. But it's actually the way to nowhere, the way to default, and the way to selling our land, because the next question will be, you should repay your debt, and what do you have as an asset?
Acropolis in Greece and the land here. and I think your story there from the building industry is an argument tying to the timber export, because you have to use the timber at home. The timber, the building sector, the furniture sector could take over. So these things are extremely dangerous, and it's bad enough in Latin America where they're tied they're still very tied to the US. But here where you're tied to the euro, and at the moment it seems that the dollar will be falling considerably and the euro will strengthen. So dollar is probably the most. I think euro would be bad enough, but I think the short term dollar is even worse, because euro is even worse, because the euro is likely to go up. But you don't want the whole country to depend on currency speculation. Right? This is very bad. Yes, you work with the central bank, right?
About investors in Japan, debt, state debt, domestic investors.
Absolutely.
In opposite to our Ukrainian situation, when the main investors, IMF, speculative capital, and others. In Japan, in venture funds.
Vulture funds, the ones who really go after you to the last penny,
and in situation with Japan state debt, we can observe situation when Japan domestic investors and corporations prefer to invest in state securities, in national currency, and they attract investitions. Such investitions are not used only for supplying. These attracted funds used for development economy. It will determine the structure of new economy. It's a main difference. And these investors are not bearing currency risk.
And you know, if your debt is in your own currency to your own people, it's like the right money owing, the right pocket owing money to the left pocket.
Yeah.
And that's not a big problem, because it's still the same thing. But the foreign debt is really much more dangerous. And I think there will be lots of defaults in the future. And this is, you know,
We may print money to outstand our debts, so such printed money are not backed by real economic development.
yeah. And you know, this was what caused this hyperinflation in Germany in the 1920s. That Germany got a big war debt, and Keynes said, if we give, he was the representative of the English Minister of Finance in the peace treaty of Versailles, and Keynes said, if we treat Germany in this way, we will have a war within the next generation. And it was a very simple mechanism that developed. You know, Germany had a lot of debt to pay, and it had to be paid in foreign currency. So what they did was print a lot of German marks, which they sold for foreign currency in order to pay the debt. And therefore the value of the mark fell. And they had to print more and more marks in order to pay the debt. So this is, you know, there is a blueprint of disaster. Yes.
Let me discuss also with the attitude of National Bank. Several years ago, beginning from 2010, we tried to push the industrial so-called behavior of National Bank together with the Cabinet of Ministers, which we failed until now. The point is that we ask, look, you have the funds in the budget, which you use, which you print money, and with the emission, which you usually use for paying on social increase of social level. Instead of that, let's use 10% of that money to invest directly to real sector, to industrial sector, and then to export the goods, just to give money to the exporters, just this. So then you will not increase the inflation, and then the budget deficit, which you increase in this case, will not influence and will not.
And the exporters will be able to pay more taxes.
Yeah. So I mean, this is a very routine practice for the exporting countries. Until now, we have not achieved anything, and this in fact, this talk is stopped now. But how we have to return to that?
Yeah, and I think this is part of the fact. And another important issue here is that economists don't know bookkeeping. And so, I mean, but if you and everybody's talking about the level of GDP debt as a percentage of GDP, right? But debt is on the balance sheet, there are assets and liabilities. Assets of companies, and the difference between assets and liabilities is the capital of the company. So debt is a liability, but nobody would look at the company and just looking at the debt. They would ask, well, what is it on the asset side, right? And this is a big problem with this Reinhardt and Rogoff argument that, you know, not only did they cheat and do wrong things, but the whole concept of only looking. In the back of my head, I remember from our business school that somebody was saying, well, be careful with counting because there are stocks and there are flows. So be careful with mixing stocks and flow. You know, the debt is a stock, GDP is a flow, right? So there, just there, you're missing something. And the fact that there was Martin Wolf in Financial Times is probably the best economic writer. He's always right. He's dead wrong on something, but he was very good here because when England had won the 100-year war with France, we had a lot of debts. But on the other hand, we controlled the world. We had something on the asset side, right? And this is the key question, you know, and you know that in a sense applies to Japan as well. So just looking at the stock of debt compared to the GDP is methodologically dubious, and not looking at the asset side is even worse. You know, the United States after when Hamilton was the Minister of Finance, the United States had a huge debt, but they had enormous assets. So they had all the land, etc., etc. So I think if you try to look at the assets of the Ukraine, you know, the asset side can be pretty good if you look at the potential, right? So don't only look at the liability side. I think this is important. So back to the relationship between finance and the real economy. This is percentage of income earned by the top 1% in the United States. You see here, just before the crash, you know, the top 1% owned 25% of the income. And then you get this refers to waves, contracted waves. You don't have to worry about that. But here you see that the post-World War boom, you know, the income of the top 1% went down to 10%. And then in the 70s, sometime in the middle of the 70s, that link that I talked about between productivity and wages broke in the United States. So here, in this period, you have unions that have power, and they negotiated, well, if we have a 4% productivity increase, in industry we'll have a 4% wage increase. No inflation, and the relationship between labor and capital unchanged. But here you see, in that bubble of the 1990s, you had this growing, and then you had the collapse of the IT bubble in 2000, and then you have a new bubble after that. Right? So here, after the war, the marginal tax rate in the United States was more than 90%. I mean, in order to pay 90% taxes, you needed billions of income. But at least the tax rate was extremely high. So it was almost, you know, now the Americans are complaining about much lower tax rates. And that's why Bernie Sanders says, yes, I may be a socialist, but I wasn't so much of a socialist as Eisenhower, because Eisenhower, the marginal tax rate was double what I was, right? So this is the short term is not remembering history is important. So you know, the 1% is back, and we have had these periods. The period of the, you know, from the 1860s and on to the 1900s, you had this kind of development, which was shared between capital and labor, right? And I think we can get that back, but we have to understand that what's so wrong. So, remember we had yesterday the good guys and the bad guys, where some of the good guys were really bad guys, right? Marx, Lenin, Hildebrand, Schumpeter, Keynes, and Minsky were people who understood financial crisis. And I asked Michael Hudson, who's a Marxist, or at least knows Marx very well, and said, why is it that the Marxists have not been able to profit from the financial crisis, which Marx actually understood? And his answer was, well, Marx on financial crisis is in volume 3 of Das Kapital, and very few Marxists get beyond volume 1, which I think was an interesting argument. But Lenin said, excuse me for raising these things, but now 25 years after the fall of the Berlin Wall, I think we can actually talk about these things, right? An English economist called Hobson, John Hobson, in the 1880s, was the first to describe the crisis of capitalism in terms of underconsumption. There will be periods in capitalism where the demand does not satisfy production. So it's an overproduction. And this, Lenin picked it up, and his kind of intuition is that, well, when financial capitalism takes over, the capitalism will collapse for lack of demand. Because the 1%, they don't consume enough, and what they consume is castles in France and big yachts, right? So the idea is that the difference between, if the rich get the money, they will hoard the money. If the poor get the money, they will spend it, right? So Schumpeter was a very conservative economist, but he also saw this. Keynes was not a radical. He wasn't the Labour Party. He was kind of a normal bourgeois guy, right? And Minsky was really a Schumpeterian. So you have people here from different political angles who do understand the same thing and conception. And those who fail to see it, Keynes, Ricardo, the classical economist, and neoliberals. So this is the interesting axis. And one point here is the role of this is wrong. This should be Hilferding. Rudolf Hilferding. Rudolf Hilferding was an Austrian Jew who wrote about Finanzkapital in 1910, and he described this mechanism. And he was killed by Gestapo in 1941, and he was Jewish. And I think an important point is that we have not cleaned up the mess from the 1930s and 40s. I see, in the Holocaust popping up these days in Ukrainian newspapers, and there is something about the 1930s which has not been cleaned up here, and I think it's one reason why we cannot speak reasonably about this with the Germans. In 2008, I was invited by ATTAC, this group of somewhat radical but against financial capitalism, to the University of Saarbrücken, where they had a summer camp, a big summer camp. And they asked, what do you want to talk about? And I said, I would like to talk about the relationship between financial capital and the real economy. And they said, no, you cannot do that, because that is anti-Semitic. Well, why? Yes. Why? And ATTAC Norway, they didn't understand anything. And I said, well, there is only one way of understanding this, is that to Hitler, the enemy was financial capital. And financial capital was England, and it was the Jews, right? So because, and that's not true at all, because the Jews were in retail, they were in manufacturing, they were all over the place. but they got the blame for. They were kind of the symbol of financial capital. So there was one reason to hate the Jews was that they were financial capital, which was absolutely wrong. But never mind, Hitler got away with it, and therefore you cannot, in Germany these days, you cannot speak about what in Germany is called Hochfinanz, high finance. The Germans still have an index of prohibited words that they cannot talk about because they haven't cleaned up the Chamber of Horrors from the 1930s. So one of the reasons why we have this mess with the financial sector is first of all, because of this hyperinflation in the after World War I, Germans are so afraid of inflation, and it goes from one generation to the other. And secondly, because criticizing financial capital is considered anti-Semitism, which is nutty. But it's still there, huh? And when I published this book in German, I tried to put in some German terms, and I tried to refer to these things. Unfortunately, my editor of in the German publishing house was a young Jewish guy, a German Jew. So I could ask him, "Can I say this?" Right? He said, "Yes, that you can say, but this you can't say." Okay. So we're still suffering. We're still suffering from not having cleaned up that mess, right? And it's very sad. And that because we cannot criticize financial capital from a theoretical point of view, we're stuck with this. Last week you had the German bank Deutsche Bank was in critical conditions, very low capital. They got a fine of $25 billion from the US Ministry of Justice. And they said, we won't pay it. And everybody said, you have to go to Berlin and to ask for money from the government. They said, no, we're not asking the government. So the Financial Times was, for 2-3 days, was full of that on the front page. So these are very, very tricky times. And one of the reasons they're so tricky is that we can't distinguish like these people do. We're on the right-hand side, where people don't distinguish between the real economy and the financial economy, whereas we should. Not because we learn this, but because this is something that was common to all, to a lot of people all over the political axis. So we have this yesterday, right? So this is the same. So when the euro was created, the original idea was to have a common currency of the strong EU countries. So Germany, Holland, Belgium, France should have a common currency, but not the periphery, which was very sensible. But then, remember the age of neo-ignorance starts with the fall of the Berlin Wall. In 1991, when Bundeskanzler Kohl was coming back from a meeting in Brussels, he said, in the name of solidarity to the poor countries, of poor periphery of Europe, we will make them also have the euro, in the name of solidarity. Right? And this is a very important thing of that period, that the intentions are the key things. The last 20 years. It's ruled by intentions. Development aid is extremely good intentions. So you don't have to look at the facts that actually development aid makes African countries corrupt and it doesn't develop them. That doesn't matter because the intention was so good. And this is the same thing with the euro, that it actually ruined the poor countries in the periphery, but because the intention was so good, we don't have to care about it, right? It's a strange mindset. So, just in order to try to explain what happened, in the United States, there was one common currency. There is one common currency across the one geographical area. You know, if there is a crisis like the car industry in Detroit, people have to move from Michigan to somewhere else. Right? And I remember when I lived in the United States in the late 70s, 25% of the names and addresses in the phone book changed every year. So they were extremely mobile. In America, extremely mobile. That was part of this frontier. Right? So, and then we had the traditional European regime. Different currencies and flexible exchange rates. Countries that do poorly are irresponsible, like Italy and Greece, find their currencies come under pressure, devalue, and their economies become more competitive. If you look at what happened in Italy and Greece, take Italy. There was really a big fight between the left and the right. You know, the political left kidnapped the Prime Minister, Aldo killed him. You know? The extreme right bombed the railway station in Bologna and killed I don't remember how many people. So this was a very tricky situation. And how did the politicians solve it? This is back to the Latin American theory of inflation, that they actually gave the workers more than they should have, and they created inflation. But this irresponsibility was actually quite productive. I ran an industrial company in Italy in the 70s and 80s. And it started out with 15 people, in the end it had about 100. And there was big inflation. The real cost of capital was minus 8%. So if your cost of capital is minus 8% and wages go up by 15% or 10% a year or 15% a year, what do you do? Well, labor is becoming more expensive, capital is dirt cheap, so you buy a lot of machinery. And you buy a lot of machinery, you get terribly productive, and wages go up, so demand goes up, and the economy grows enormously. You know, in the 70s and 80s, under this very irresponsible regime, actually Italian real wages grew much faster than German real wages. So what was apparently irresponsible was actually quite clever, but not by design. Typically capitalism, this is somewhat of Schumpeter. Capitalism is a string of accidents. Nobody planned it, right? And this is a typical case. Mario Draghi is 2 years older than me. His parents died when he was 16, and he had two younger brother and sister. So his father, Mario Draghi's father, worked for the Ministry of Finance. So he was paid. He got his pension, and the insurance paid in treasury bonds, Buoni del Tesoro, Italian treasury bonds. So Mario Draghi grew up seeing the value of his money being reduced by 8% a year. I had the same situation from the production point of view, and it was a great success. But for Mario Draghi, inflation was terrible. And he actually admits this in an interview with Der Spiegel, because the Germans don't think that they are the only ones who worry about inflation, really. And he said, well, I have a personal reason for hating inflation. And he explains this a bit. Right? But Mario Draghi has a very bad reputation in Italy. The former president and Prime Minister, Mr. Cossiga, we have him on record saying that Mario Draghi is a villain. He's un vile affarista, a bad businessman. And he gave away Italian state-owned companies, just a bit like in Russia. And the former president of Italy, Cossiga, says, don't give power to Draghi because he will give everything to his American friends. So I think there are some very nasty things happening inside the European Union in terms of debt. Well, let's take this now because I don't know if I have a slide. Well, first of all, Greece should be able to go bankrupt. You shouldn't shrink the economy, shrink when the debt cannot be paid. The two key institutions of capitalism, according to Van Somewhat, is bookkeeping and bankruptcy. We talked about bankruptcy yesterday. And Greece should go bankrupt. Then there was a crisis in Cyprus. And the European Central Bank cheated because they didn't follow the normal rules of bankruptcy. If a company goes bankrupt, first, the second priority, creditors lose their money, then the first priority, and then, if it's a bank, well, then the people who have deposits in the bank lose. Right? But if you are in charge of a bankruptcy, you cannot say, oh, I don't like the face of those who have the first priority, so I'll pay the second priority and not the first priority. You can't do that. But this is essentially what the European Central Bank did in Cyprus. They didn't like the face of the depositors because the big depositors were Russians. So actually they tried to protect the bondholders and took the money of the people who had money in the bank first. Not following the rules of bankruptcy. So, cheating. Right. And the worst case is perhaps Ireland. The Irish banks went bankrupt. And with that bankruptcy, the bondholders, the people who own bonds securing those in those Irish banks, should have lost their money. But there was an enormous political pressure on Ireland to take over the responsibility for those bonds. So the Irish taxpayers were forced to take over the loans to the Irish banks that went bankrupt. And this is an absolute scandal. In Ireland, the newspaper talked about the night we were mugged for €5 billion. €5 billion, which should have been lost by bondholders, was taken over by the Irish taxpayers. This is crony capitalism. This is really nasty capitalism, and it's the European Central Bank behind it. That they shelter the financial sector, which should lose the money, and give the responsibility over to the real economy. And this is what we should be aware of. And this is, the picture of the Ukrainian debt. It should be seen in this perspective, that the people we're dealing with are crooks. Mario Draghi, it is really, in my view, what should be considered. He's a con man. He's fooling us. And this whole idea of printing money, we'll get to that. On the one hand, Draghi has one task: to keep inflation low. He was elected as a dictator for 8 or 9 years, and the only thing he had to do was keep inflation low. How many Greek children die from malnutrition is none of his business, right? And in the old days, what you would do if inflation was too low, well, you just raise wages, right? It was the easiest thing in the world to create more inflation, just give people some more wages, and which will also help demand, which was very good. But now they come from a different theory. They come from the Hayek theory, where the quantity of money is everything. And they don't think about how that money is distributed, right? So they're printing money, back to bookkeeping. What's on the asset side of Mr. Draghi's balance sheet is on the liability side in the real business. So when they are printing money, they're in fact at the same time printing debt. Right? So this is really unsustainable. and it's a big problem. And the Ukraine is part of that. You're in the same boat. Poland got a lot of debt written off. The question is, they used to say in the old days that when there is nothing to be had, even the emperor has lost his rights. And not only here, but also clearly in Italy, the debt, the sovereign debt of Italy can never be paid. But they're just rolling it over to earn interest on yes.
What do you think about Iceland's situation?
Well, I'm glad we raised that, because Iceland proves the point of having your own currency. Iceland, 300,000 people, the size of a little part of Kiev. They have their own currency, and because they have their own currency, they could devalue, and the real economy bumped back relatively fast. So that if there is one argument against dollarization, it's Ireland and it's Iceland. And it's an interesting story. And you have a question right there?
Not a question, but comment.
Yeah.
We discussed about exercise of European banks, the European central banks. May be important for Ukraine to become one part of these assets, but what kind of assets? Assets in real economy, but not in speculative economy, in currencies, in our state securities. If we attract long-term financing, which is cheaper than our domestic, because of quantitative easing, but we should direct this money
in the real economy. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. This is
a great solution when we discuss about structured deficits. Ukraine, the real sector, in my mind, must be unique kind of deficits for European banks and for Ukraine central banks. We should provide them only for non-bank security, but we should provide not only themselves, but ourselves, but with real assets, with investments in the real economy.
And the famous Swede on the first day on the forum, who promised more money to the Ukraine. What kind of money did he promise? I don't think he promised money to the real economy.
Danielson?
What was his name? The gentleman who represented the EU Commissioner for Friendly Relationships and Expansion, or something like that, some silly title like that.
In fact, they don't offer anything. We investigated that case in 2014, and we were in negotiations, and we tried to prove the guys to invest, like Vadim says, to the real sector. And at the end, there was a group of 9, so-called group of 9. Euro Commission experts on each sector, like agriculture, nation building. So on our request, on the experts from Ukrainian side. But then after three months, the guy from Hungary, I forgot his name. The guy responsible Euro Commission for the financing of the countries, former CIS countries. So at the end, they announced they give 11 billion euros, which in fact were not to the real sector. All of them were the credits for macro stability, some technical assistance, and small amounts of money like 500 million euro a year to support SMEs. But at the end, this support of SMEs is so-called support because it goes through
consultants.
Consultancy, and it goes sometimes through Osher Bank, through the Savings Bank of Ukraine, or through Exim Bank of Ukraine, which are not efficient in giving loans to the small and medium enterprises. So what you say, it never was in the minds of Europeans. And Mr. Danielson, he even does not understand what is the essence of the question.
Yeah.
When he was asked several times, he said, you have to fight corruption and to do deregulation. So this is his mantra, and he even did not hear and he did not listen what we wanted to ask him. So in fact, my opinion that we will never have any real credits from European Union. I mean, directed to our real sector. So this is, in fact, thank you for asking that. This is my question. In fact, if we understand that we will never have any credits from European Union, if we have any credits, cheap money from China, they are always linked credits.
Mm-hmm.
Credits to buy specific goods in China, which is not interesting. It never goes to the manufacturing here in Ukraine. And if we talk about the money from the other sources, like from United States, they are not achievable. So then what? But and we have limit to bring our money.
Yep.
So in fact, we have the situation of economy to shrink further and further. So according to the law of IMF, what do we do?
Well, I think you remember that Cuban example of the Cubans printing dollars. I think there are ways around it, and I'm not the expert. The expert is Mr. Jan Kregel, who was for many years an American, who was head of finance for development within UNCTAD. He's the guy who knows all these instruments, and he will be in Tallinn next month. So maybe you should go and see him and invite him here perhaps for the next year. But he is the virtuoso of these financial instruments, and he's the one who actually wrote what's now called the Stiglitz report. It's not the Stiglitz report; it's really the Kregel report. But they stole, Stiglitz put his name on it. So and he's the guy who we almost got him to Zimbabwe. The ticket was there. We were going together. How can we get out of this awful dollarization situation? But then it must have been Mugabe. 2 days before he was going to come, somebody says, "No, we don't want this." And this is 91-year-old Mugabe who doesn't want to rock the boat, right? I'm not a specialist, but how to create these financial instruments, that's Jan Kregel. He's done it for he's like 72, and he's done it this for a lifetime. He's been Minsky, and he's been remember I told about the people who understood the financial crisis, that they only survived in the periphery at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, and at Bard College. Well, that's Kregel, right? A brilliant economist who sacrificed his career for doing what he thought was relevant. So Kregel and I had a course we got money from the Ford Foundation. In 2004 and 2005, we traveled around from Trinidad to Peru to Uganda to all over the place, and had a course in alternative development economics. I talked about the real economy, Jan talked about the financial economy, and that's the way it still is. And so I can point you in the right direction, and there are tools that can be done. It was a long digression, but let's, we have the traditional European regime, which is you adjust by adjusting currencies, right? The American system is adjust by moving people, and the traditional European system was adjust currencies. And then, without knowing it, without being aware of what they did, the European Union changed from the European to the US regime. When there is a crisis in Greece, they cannot you cannot devalue the drachma, which has been there for 2,000 years. So the Greek crisis is solved by the Greeks moving to Germany, something neither the Greeks nor the Germans want. Right? This is, I think, very relevant also for the Ukraine. And being able to devalue is important. Last year, James Galbraith, the American economist, was here at the forum, and we were sitting in the dining room at my wife and him and myself, and discussing the Greek crisis. James was a consultant to the German, to the Greek Minister of Finance, Mr. Varoufakis. And he told me that he had been in a meeting with the Greek Minister of Finance and the German Minister of Finance, Mr. Schäuble. And Mr. Schäuble was actually willing to let Greece leave the European Union, which leave the Eurozone, which surprised me. But so he said actually Schäuble was much more reasonable than what he had thought. But I think that the sticky issue was that if you want this to work, you have to get rid of the debt, and you have to get out of the euro. But this was the Greek problem. They wanted to have their cake and still eat it. They wanted to get rid of the debt and keep the euro.
Why?
So in a sense there is a blame also on the Greeks here, because what you will have is a conflict between the productive sector and the real estate sector. And this is clearly what happened, for instance, in Latvia. If Latvia had saved its productive sector by devaluing, the real estate economy, which was very big, was indebted in Europe. So if you devalued to save the productive sector, you would kill off the real estate sector. Right? So this is a kind of a similar thing in Greece. And it's a generational problem to some extent. We have the same thing in Italy. The generational and class problem in a way. If you have a lot of people indebted in euro or dollars, there will be a tremendous pressure not to save the real economy, right? And I think you're probably into this mess already, but it's very important to be aware of it. And in Latvia, it was very clear. I said when Estonia joined the euro, I said probably Estonia would be the last country to join the euro, because it was obvious that it was such bad news. But then Latvia also joined afterwards. So these are I think it's important to be aware of these conflicts of interest that we're getting into.
How do you solve this conflict of interest? What are the instruments?
Political will, saying, well, we have who do we support? The working people who need a salary, or the rich people who own all the buildings and are indebted in the wrong currency? I mean, maybe it's demagogic, but you have to choose, and perhaps there are middle ways, and that's another reason why it's so. Back to this Italian thing, if the right pocket owes money to the left pocket, no problem. That and so if Italian debt was always like in Japan, almost 100% was in lira, and it was to its own population. Then you could devalue and nothing happened. So the problem of indebting in foreign currency is politically a bomb, really. So one should look into how serious is that here, and how can is there a way of converting it before devaluing? Could the government force the loans into local currency and then devalue? There's a timing thing here also, and it, of course, potentially possible to prohibit. That's what Latin American countries did. You know, it's prohibited to have assets in foreign currencies or debt in foreign currencies. But that's very radical, and people will look at it and not understand why. Right?
One example of damage or great concentration of financial sector about Italian banks. The population is one of the greatest investors in Ukrainian banks by acting as bondholders of such banks. And as you know, in cases of bank bankruptcy, the new European directive provide banking regulators with instruments as called bail-in. So we may convert these bonds in capital of the banks to cover expenses and cover risks and cover losses. Financial sector, saving financial sector in such way, we destroy
the credibility of the people.
We destroy real sector economy. Investment resources which may be directed in factories and plants and small and medium enterprises used to solve banks.
Yes.
So we find another problem. Banks may be not effective instruments to provide with such financial resources real sector economy, or with such epoch of transformation bank functions or other financial institutions. What is your opinion in such way? Is this a great example of imbalances between the real sector, financial sector, and these sectors of economy? And main financial institutions, banks, can be the instruments of solving the problem of such imbalances. Are they?
No, I think we're back to the bankruptcy thing again. You know that I think the Ukraine should be allowed to default on their foreign loans, right? And the bail-in thing. This is what happened in Cyprus. Of course, you got this bail-in thing, which I think is very dangerous because you have the financial sector saving itself at the expense of the real economy, as you say. It's a big dilemma, and I think getting the political sensitivity away from corruption. As I say, I was in Mozambique, and the first thing the EU representative says, "Oh, this country is poor because of corruption." They say the same thing all over. I went to Mongolia in the year 2000, and there the World Bank came and the IMF came with the same story to every country. And I found out that in one document they had the search and replace function in Word. So you write a document for Ecuador, and then you just replace it with Mongolia. And I found a document where they had forgotten. So there was in middle of the Mongolian document there was Ecuador. Right? So this is, they've gotten away with this thing for 25 years. It's really crazy. And if you look at my piece written on Mongolia, I could send you a book where it's in. That is the country which lost within 3 or 4 years they lost 90% of the manufacturing sector. And then they had the mining boom, which helped. But now the mining boom is over, and it's a disaster.
There is also. You want to follow, yeah?
No, but you.
There is also a question about the debt, the Ukrainian case, which you maybe have to analyze more precisely. Yeah. In 2015, we had the Minister of Finance, who used to be the Chicago American woman of Ukrainian origin, very patriotic, even nationalistic. But what he did, negotiating our debts with the IMF, we had a debt of $19 billion at that moment. And we had to pay $4.5 billion. So what she managed to do, she managed to have a haircut of $5 billion and 25%,
something like that?
25%
yeah.
haircut, and to postpone the first payments on that debt, the left debt of $15 billion, to the year 2020.
I think I can say kicking the can down the road. You know, they're just postponing the problem. Yeah.
But there is another issue with that. So what was behind the scenes, but then it was transparent and everybody knew about that in exchange to do that haircut and postponing the debt, they have a demand, and it is written by the government of Ukraine, that from 2020, if we have GDP growth more than 3% a year, we have to pay 40% of the growth to the IMF. 40% of the growth. So that means if we develop with the level of around 7% of GDP growth from 2020 to 2040, for 20 years we will pay $180 billion. So not to pay $19 billion or to announce bankruptcy, with haircut of 25% of the debt of $19 billion, we signed, the government, the Chicago nationalist of Ukrainian origin, but with the mindset of neoliberalism. She signed the agreement that we pay $180 billion if we grow. If we don't grow, then we pay $15 billion, that's it. So now we are, nobody talks about that because it's not yet 2020. But if we are in 2020, and from the next year already, we will have the growth of 3%, and then we will have at least 4 or 5% growth because we are on a very low basic. Then we come back to that situation, and we have to pay this stupid amount, you know.
There is in international legal practice, there's a term for it. It's debt that can be refuted. You know, and if an African country has a dictator which has stolen a lot of money, if somebody has signed a deal which is completely against common sense and ethic, you know, that debt can be refuted. So I think this is the case where you should come under that. And Norway has been, you know, has been a country pushing for this. And there's the conferences. And a friend of mine who used to work for the United Nations, Yomo, who is a Malaysian, he's into these things. So I think we should perhaps get him involved and say, well, under what conditions is it that that's been possible to refuse that? Because, you know, if in the legal world, if somebody asks you to sign something and he has a pistol against your head and you sign, well, that is not legal anymore, right? Because it's signed under you know, whatever the legal is called. This is a case like that, I think.
Do you think Ukrainian civil society should start this process, because we don't believe government can start this process?
I think
even now, before 2020, because, you know, when it comes to 2020, the guys will tell, look, you waited until 2020, now you come with this discussion.
Yes, absolutely. I think that you should build your case and don't be don't be harassed by this corruption thing, that's the only thing, you know. I think you're under, the whole nation is under this awful pressure, and I think, yes, you know, take things which also abroad can be seen as extremely unfair and flag them. Right? Maybe that's for instance, I would also like to have the you know, in the instances when export has been denied and when they have changed the quotas, like this thing with with the scrap metal export duty, you know, and the timber things, you know, I think the elites, EU, IMF, all these people, they shelter themselves by this corruption thing. And it's important to raise the issue internationally, because there are lots now NGOs, there are people who want a fair world, right? And things that insult people's fairness, I think should be flagged. And you get civil society with you. And this is part of the United States in the 1890s changed because of Veblen and because of one woman called Ida Tarbell, who wrote a book about Standard Oil and showed how corrupt Standard Oil was. You know, that changed the whole mentality. There were some journalists, and I'm working with a journalist in Tagesanzeiger in Berlin, Harald Schumann, and he wrote a book about globalization 15 years ago. It sold very well. And he has been trying to investigate these shady things of the European Central Bank. For instance, who owned the bonds that the Irish taxpayers were forced to take over? Who owned them? And he's been working on this for 4 years. He has got people in the European Parliament to raise the question. Inside the European, we want to know who owned those bonds. You know, who was it that, who gets the money that the Irish taxpayers were forced to pay? Impossible to find out. Absolutely impossible to find out. So I think maybe we should get this group of investigative journalists, because, you know, building up the evidence of how rotten the financial sector really is. You know, this is important. And the Irish case is awful. I spoke to a group of bankers in Oslo last Thursday, and I got the bankers to admit how rotten this was. You know, if you just, even the bankers who are part of the system. So, because most bankers are decent people. You know, and I said to these bankers, a quote from an American author in 1934, Upton Sinclair, who says that it's very difficult to have people understand something when the salary depends on them not understanding it. That if you understand this, you lose your job. And the chief economist of the biggest Norwegian bank said, yes, you're right. You know, we're overpaid, and we have a tremendous incentive not to see these things.
But can we find the people, I mean, among this NGO society, to explain whether there have been such cases on, like I explained that not to pay them with 15 billion, we should pay 10 times more?
I think, you know, what we know is that they postpone, instead of cancelling the debt, which they should do, they just postpone it. And we should look into what conditions, under what conditions they are postponed. Maybe there are several other cases. Maybe?
Moreover, what the issue is not only about position of our foreign partners, it's more about position of our government, because even if we have this deal fixed, and even if we have a default which will allow us to write off huge foreign debt, if we don't change the economic policy, nothing will change, because we'll get the same burden in 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
The same thing. So actually, it's about understanding. It's about the policy content. It's not about some kind of particular agreements. It's only kind of results, outcomes of the policy. So we really need to change the very core of the economic policy, and of course then we can support it with having this, for example, default, which is a controlled default, not an unexpected one, and use it as a tool for boosting economic growth. But not just having a default without changing economic policy and losing all the international credibility and so on, because it will result in even worse outcomes.
Now, I think we should try to use this German journalist who is really driven by the unfairness of the system, and he's Harald Schumann, and I think you should invite Jan Kregel, or perhaps I can write him a mail and ask if he normally goes for 2 weeks to Estonia from the US, but he goes twice. You know, he's 1 week and then he goes back, and perhaps he can come by here, or you can travel up to Tallinn and we could all meet there or something like that. Because it's, you know, this requires top competence, and in terms of industrial policy, you know, I think to a large extent I have that, but I don't have it on the monetary on the financial side. But knowing who has it is good enough. Because the interesting thing is that your situation here right now is in many ways similar to Latin America in the 60s and 70s, right? So the good thing is that you can learn. There are things to learn from that. There's experience to learn from. But I think it's getting up to 3 o'clock on a Sunday, so perhaps we should leave it here, and there are things about what's important of in finance is also the impact of compound interest. That was one economist who calculated that if somebody had saved 6 shillings at the birth of Christ, you know, at compound interest, that will be as much money as a lump of gold the size of the orbit of Saturn in the solar system. I mean, if you take 1.06 times 1.06 times 1.06, 2016 times from the birth of Christ, it's the growth of money, the growth of the financial sector is so fantastic that it has to be stopped. And this is what was understood in Mesopotamia under Hammurabi 1,700 years before Christ. He understood that debt would grow very fast, and faster and faster, exponentially, right? So you had to have what was later in the New Testament called Jubilee years. Jubilee years was years when all debt except short-term credit was abolished, was cancelled, right? And this is what in the New Testament is called Jubilee years, and I think this is what we need. And what we see now is that they're just postponing the payment, but making this. I wasn't aware of that awful condition. This is absolutely crazy. Yes. If there is something about that in English, if you said it, that would be great. Somebody once asked Einstein if there was anything more powerful than the atomic bomb, and he supposedly said the power of compound interest. It grows fantastically after a while, right? And only that tells you that there will be financial crisis. And in 1992, I had this guy Michael Hudson starting to talk to me about these things. And I said, well, yes, it seems correct, but it must only be a curiosity, right? And then you had a financial crisis, and I said, aha, here is what Mr. Hudson told me 6 years ago. Now I understand the mechanism. So there are people, and he was also University of Missouri, Kansas. So these people in the fringes who understood the mechanism. So it's been a pleasure to be here, and your impressive patience in using your weekend for this. I think that's very encouraging, and I think let's try to work with the investigative journalist, and if you can think of some journalists here who would be after these things, if we can couple Ukrainian journalist who likes to dig in these things with this German journalist who also likes to do it, then I think we can get something going. And then on the theoretical side, Mr. Craig, he was the one I told you about the Cuban banknotes, right? Did I? Yeah, that Cuba had two currencies. The peso, which was worth nothing, and then they had the dollars. But there were few dollars because the Americans were taking them back, etc., etc. So Jan Kregel Cubans asked him to come and as a consultant, and he suggests that the Central Bank of Cuba starts printing banknotes saying, "We, the Central Bank of Cuba, promises to pay against these banknotes $50, $100, $10, whatever." So he put the Cuban government in the business of printing dollars, right? Which is very clever, very, very clever. And as long as they didn't print too many of them, as long as they didn't create inflation, this worked perfectly. Of course, it only worked inside Cuba, but you need people who can think that creatively. Maybe a second currency is the solution. Argentina, in the crisis of 1990, they had every province of Argentina, 16 or something like that, they all had their own currency. So that was a mess. but it's if you think less dogmatically about currency, if you think of it as an accounting unit, not as gold or something fantastic, if you think of it as, well, it's just an accounting unit, then it becomes less dangerous, right? Then you can think more pragmatically, and I think that would be useful here as well. Okay, well, thank you very much.